I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, my life would eventually belong to me. It took 28 years, one destroyed acceptance letter, and a wedding that turned into something closer to a courtroom for me to understand how wrong I'd been. I was the responsible one. That was the role I was assigned before I was old enough to understand it was a role at all, back when I was maybe 7 and my brother Marcus was 5. Already the kind of child who broke things and watched with something like curiosity whether anyone would actually make him pay for it. Nobody ever did. Not really. My mother had a particular way of smoothing over his messes that always seemed to end with the mess quietly becoming someone else's job, usually mine. Once I was old enough to hold a dustpan, then a checkbook, then, eventually, an entire family's expectations. I don't say this to paint myself as a martyr. I said yes to most of it willingly in the beginning. There's a specific satisfaction in being the child your parents can rely on, and for a long time I mistook that reliance for love, the way you sometimes mistake being useful for being wanted. I studied like it was the only door out of a house that never quite felt like it had room for me in it. 2 part-time jobs through high school, a grocery store on weeknights, a diner on weekends, stacked on top of a course load that left me finishing homework at gas station counters during my 15-minute breaks. I wanted law school the way some people want air. Not because I loved the idea of courtrooms particularly at 17, but because I understood with a clarity that felt almost physical, that a law degree was a door nobody in my family could quietly close on me once I'd walked through it. I got in, full scholarship, one of the best programs in the country, the kind of acceptance that comes with a packet thick enough to feel like proof you weren't imagining your own potential. I remember the online portal update, a small green checkmark that should have been the happiest 5 seconds of my life. I never saw the physical envelope. My mother collected the mail on our street, had for years, a habit that felt like nothing more than convenience until it very much wasn't. She told me, 3 weeks after I'd been quietly refreshing my email waiting for a letter that had in fact already arrived and already been opened by someone else's hands, that there'd been no acceptance, that the portal update must have been some kind of processing error, that I should call the admissions office myself if I didn't believe her. I did call. I got a busy signal for 2 days. A coincidence, I told myself then, though I understand now that very little about that week was coincidence. By the time I got through to someone at the university, weeks had passed. Financial aid deadlines had quietly closed, and the woman on the phone, apologetic and confused, told me my seat had been reassigned to a waitlisted student since they'd received no confirmation of enrollment from me. I cried in my bedroom for the better part of a month, not loudly. My mother didn't tolerate loud grief. It interrupted the household's equilibrium. I cried quietly into a pillow, the specific silent grief of a person who has been taught her disappointments are an inconvenience to everyone around her. Then I buried it. That's really the only honest word for what I did with a dream that size. Not moved past it, not healed from it, just buried it somewhere I stopped visiting, because visiting it hurt too much to survive on a normal Tuesday. I got a job as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized insurance firm. Steady, unremarkable, the kind of job that pays rent and asks nothing more of you than showing up on time, which, after the particular devastation of that year, felt almost like a relief. I gave most of my paycheck to my parents to help out, a phrase that had become so normalized in our house I rarely questioned what exactly I was helping with, or why a household with 2 working adults still needed so much help from a 22-year-old answering phones. Marcus, meanwhile, had discovered investing, or what he called investing, a rotating series of business ventures that always seemed to require an infusion of capital just before they'd have paid off. If only someone believed in him a little longer, extended a little more credit, gave him one more chance the way our parents always, unfailingly, did. I watched him lose money on a food truck franchise that never got a truck, on a cryptocurrency scheme 2 of his college friends talked him into, on a sure-thing sports book arrangement with men our father referred to uneasily as his associates, a phrase that should have worried me more than it did at the time, back when I still believed the worst thing that could happen in our family was disappointment, not danger. By the time I was 24, the debts weren't abstract anymore. Men started calling the house, not politely, I answered the phone once and heard a voice, flat and unhurried in a way that somehow made it more frightening than shouting would have, explain exactly what would happen to my father's small business if a payment didn't arrive by a specific date. I remember my hands shaking so badly I dropped the phone. My mother took it from me on the floor, not to comfort me, but to finish the conversation herself, in the calm, negotiating tone I'd later come to recognize as the exact voice she used whenever she was managing a problem she had no intention of solving honestly. That's when the dinner started, small at first. My mother, gentle in the specific way she was only gentle when she wanted something, talking about family, about sacrifice, about how blood meant showing up for each other when it mattered most. She'd talk about how hard my father had worked, how much Marcus was struggling with the weight of his mistakes, how a family that didn't protect each other wasn't really a family at all. I didn't understand for months that she was building toward something. I thought it was just guilt, the ordinary background static of our house. I didn't understand I was being prepared. The businessman's name was Richard Calloway, 60 years old, a widower, the kind of quiet, self-made wealth that didn't advertise itself in flashy cars or younger girlfriends, which somehow made what my parents were arranging feel to them more respectable than it actually was. My mother met with him twice before I even knew his name, presenting me, I'd later learn, as a bright, devoted young woman looking for a stable, meaningful partnership with an older man who valued family. She showed him photographs, talked about my work ethic, my patience, my old soul, every true thing about me, repackaged as a sales pitch for a transaction I hadn't agreed to yet. When they finally told me, it wasn't a question. It was framed as one. What would you think about meeting someone? But I understood, watching my father's eyes stay fixed on the table the entire time, that this wasn't a conversation with two possible outcomes. I said no. I want that on the record in this story clearly. I said no immediately, and I kept saying it for weeks, through dinners that grew tenser, through a campaign of quiet, relentless pressure that framed my resistance as selfishness, as a betrayal of a family that had given me everything. You already gave up on the future you wanted, my mother said once, not cruelly, which somehow made it worse, said like a simple fact like weather. This is a way to be useful with the future you have left. I kept refusing. I want you to understand that I did fight quietly in the only ways available to a 24-year-old with no money of her own and a family who controlled the roof over her head. It wasn't enough. 3 weeks after I gave my final no, my mother sat across from me at the kitchen table with her phone face down in front of her, and told me, in a voice gone suddenly cold in a way I'd never heard from her before, that there were images of me circulating. Images I had never posed for, never taken, never consented to in any form I recognized. Generated, she said, by someone Marcus knew, using photos scraped from my old social media, my work profile, a graduation photo from high school. Images that looked, she assured me, indistinguishable from real. Nobody wants this getting out, she said. Not for you, not for us. Marcus's friend can make them disappear. Richard doesn't need to know anything about this. All you have to do is say yes. I sat very still at that table for a long time. I remember the specific sensation of the floor tilting under a chair that hadn't moved, the particular helplessness of understanding, all at once, that the people who were supposed to protect me from the world had instead built a version of the world designed specifically to leave me nowhere else to go. I said yes 3 days later, not because I believed it was right, because I couldn't see from inside that kitchen any door that didn't lead through that word. The wedding date was set for 6 weeks later. My mother cried when she announced it to extended family, actual tears, the kind I hadn't seen from her since Marcus's college graduation. Tears. I understood even then less about happiness than relief, the specific relief of a woman who had just successfully closed a debt she'd never intended to carry herself. I sat in my room that night and thought about a green checkmark on a university portal, 4 years old and buried under everything that had happened since. And I wondered, for the first time in a very long while, what my life might have looked like if that letter had simply been allowed to reach me. The discovery started with something almost absurdly small. I needed my old academic transcripts for a background check at work, a routine request, the kind of bureaucratic errand that shouldn't have changed anything about my life. I logged into the university's alumni portal, more out of habit than expectation, using an old student ID number I hadn't touched in 4 years. The portal remembered me, not as a prospective student who'd been rejected, as an enrolled one. A brief, dormant file flagged inactive for non-enrollment, but sitting there unmistakably under a status field that read, "Accepted full scholarship AWARDED." I stared at that screen for what must have been 20 minutes. I remember the specific physical sensation of my own pulse in my ears, loud enough to drown out the office noise around me. I remember thinking, first, that it had to be a database error, some clerical mistake 4 years old that had simply never been corrected. I called the admissions office that afternoon, my hands unsteady enough that I had to redial twice. The woman who answered pulled my file while I waited, her voice going carefully neutral in the specific way people's voices go neutral when they've realized they're about to say something that will upset the person on the other end of the line. "You were accepted," she said. "Full scholarship 4 years ago. We have a confirmation email sent to the address on file, and a follow-up call log showing an outbound call made from our office that same week. According to our notes, someone confirmed receipt and then failed to complete enrollment paperwork by the deadline." "Someone confirmed receipt," I repeated. My voice didn't sound like my own. "Your mother's name is listed as the point of contact on that call," she said. "Is that not correct?" I don't remember hanging up the phone. I remember sitting in the stairwell of my office building, the fire door propped slightly open behind me, feeling something in my chest come apart in a way I didn't have words for yet. Not grief, not exactly, though there was grief in it. Something closer to the specific vertigo of realizing an entire decade of your life had been built on a lie you'd been handed on purpose. I didn't go home that night. I told my mother I was staying late at work, a lie that came easier than I expected, the first genuinely private thing I'd kept from her in years. I sat in my car in a grocery store parking lot instead, and I let myself, for the first time since I was 20, actually feel the size of what had been taken from me. Then slowly, over the following days, feeling gave way to something colder, something closer to purpose. I started small. I found an old family laptop in a closet, one my father rarely used, and searched through folders I'd never had reason to look at before. Buried 3 layers deep in a folder labeled with almost insulting mundanity, "Taxes 2019. I found a document that had nothing to do with taxes at all. A scanned marriage contract, dated weeks before my parents had ever mentioned Richard's name to me, outlining a financial arrangement between my father and a man I didn't recognize. A broker of some kind with a line item that made my stomach turn. Introduction fee, contingent on completed union." I found emails between my mother and Marcus's friend, the one she'd mentioned, vaguely, as capable of making the images disappear. That made clear those images hadn't been created to be deleted. They'd been created specifically as leverage generated weeks before that kitchen table conversation, sitting ready in a folder, waiting for the exact moment my mother needed them. I found the loan documents, Marcus's actual debt, laid out in full for the first time. Not the vague, dramatic sum my parents had always implied, but exact figures, exact lenders, some legitimate, some very much not, totaling an amount that made the specific shape of my parents' desperation finally make sense to me in a way it hadn't before. Whatever else was true about what they'd done to me, some real, ugly, adult danger had been closing in on our family, and instead of facing it, they had decided quietly, years in advance, exactly which child would be sacrificed to make it disappear. And then I found something I hadn't expected at all, evidence that Richard himself had no idea what he'd been sold. An email thread between my mother and Richard's assistant arranging the initial meeting described me, without my knowledge, as eager for a stable, meaningful partnership, and recently graduated with career ambitions on hold by choice. Every phrase constructed to sound like consent I had never given. Richard's own responses when I found them read like a genuinely careful, thoughtful man, asking, more than once, whether I was certain about the age difference, whether I had any reservations he should know about, whether I had family or friends I wanted more involved in the process. Question after question, my mother had intercepted and answered for me, in my name, in a voice that was never mine. He wasn't a predator shopping for a young wife. He was a lonely, honest man who had been lied to as thoroughly as I had. I sat with that discovery for a long time, turning it over, because it complicated something I badly wanted to keep simple. If Richard was also being deceived, then maybe he wasn't my enemy in this. Maybe he was the one person inside this entire arrangement who might actually care about the truth once he had it. I didn't know if I could trust that theory with my whole life, but by then, 6 weeks had narrowed down to 2 days, and I didn't have very many doors left to try. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, the same room I'd cried in 4 years earlier over a letter I never got to open, and I wrote the email of my life. I attached the university confirmation, the admissions call log, screenshots of my mother posing as me in Richard's correspondence. I attached the loan documents, the introduction fee contract, the folder of deepfake images with their creation metadata still intact, proof they'd been generated weeks before I'd ever refused the marriage. I attached a short recording I'd made secretly on my phone during one of the pressure dinners, my mother's voice audible, unmistakable, saying the words, "This is a way to be useful with the future you have left." I wrote almost nothing in the body of the email itself. I didn't trust myself to write more than a few sentences without falling apart entirely. And some instinct told me the documents needed to speak louder than I could that night in my own voice. Mr. Calloway *, I don't know what my parents told you about me or about this marriage. I don't think much of it was true. I'm attaching everything I've found over the past 10 days. I'm not asking you to do anything specific with it. I only felt you deserved to know before tomorrow, whatever you decide to do with that. I sent it at 11:47 that night, and then sat on the edge of my bed for nearly 2 hours, phone in my lap, terrified I just handed my family's darkest secrets, along with my own, to a man who might simply hand them right back to my mother in the morning. His reply came at 1:52 a.m. one sentence, no explanation attached. Attend the wedding exactly as planned. Trust me for one more day. I didn't sleep. I don't think anyone in that house did, though for entirely different reasons than mine. The next morning moved through me like something happening to someone else. My mother fussed over my hair with genuine tears in her eyes, telling me how proud she was, how this was going to fix everything, how someday I'd understand this had been an act of love. I let her fuss. I said almost nothing. Every word I might have said felt like it would either give away everything or shatter me completely, and I needed for a few more hours to hold both pieces of myself together. Marcus found me in the hallway before the ceremony, uncharacteristically sober-looking, and said quietly, "Thank you," in a voice that almost sounded like it cost him something. I looked at him and thought about a folder of images generated using a photo from my high school graduation, and I said nothing back at all. The church was beautiful, in the specific, expensive way things are beautiful when someone else is paying for a performance. White flowers, a string quartet. My father walked me down the aisle with his hand trembling slightly on my arm, whether from guilt or nerves I never asked and never learned. Richard stood at the altar in a dark suit, his expression unreadable in a way that terrified me more than anger would have. I searched his face for some sign of what was coming. Some flicker of the man who'd written, "Trust me for one more day" at 2 in the morning, and found nothing but calm, careful patience. The minister began the ceremony. My mother in the front pew dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, radiant with relief. Marcus sat beside her, texting under the program already, I'd learn later, messaging one of his creditors that the debt would be cleared within the week. We reached the vows. The minister turned to Richard, asked him to repeat the traditional words, and I watched him take a slow breath, watched something shift behind his eyes from patience into something harder, more deliberate. He didn't look at me. He looked past me, directly at my parents, and reached into his jacket. "Before we continue," he said, his voice calm, carrying easily through a church gone suddenly, completely silent, "I think everyone here deserves to see what I received 2 nights ago." He held up the folded acceptance letter first, not the original, which had never survived whatever drawer or shredder it had been condemned to, but a reprint from the university, stamped and dated, showing acceptance 4 years old. "Would anyone like to explain," he said, still looking only at my parents, "why this was hidden for 4 years?" Nobody answered. I watched my mother's face do something I'd never seen it do before. Not embarrassment, not yet, but a kind of frantic, silent calculation. The look of a woman searching for a lie fast enough to still be usable. Richard didn't wait for one. He nodded toward the back of the church, and I understood, watching the doors open, that whatever he'd spent the last 2 days doing had gone considerably further than simply reading my email. A projection screen I hadn't noticed being set up near the altar, discreetly installed sometime that morning under the ordinary chaos of wedding preparations, flickered to life. The admissions confirmation call log appeared first, university letterhead unmistakable, my mother's name listed clearly as the contact who'd confirmed receipt and then never completed enrollment. Gasps moved through the pews behind me, quiet at first, then less quiet. 4 years ago, Richard said, this woman was accepted to law school on a full scholarship. Her family told her she'd failed. They destroyed that acceptance to keep her available for exactly this. He clicked forward. The introduction fee contract appeared next, my father's signature at the bottom, a broker's name I still didn't recognize above it. The line item about contingent payment displayed in a size that made it impossible for anyone in that church to pretend they hadn't seen it. Her father was paid to make this marriage happen, Richard continued. Not asked, paid. My mother stood up finally, her voice sharp and cracking at once. This is a private family matter, you have no right. I have every right, Richard said, and for the first time, something genuinely hard entered his voice, the calm patience I'd relied on all night finally giving way to something closer to fury, though still, remarkably, controlled. I was deceived into this marriage as thoroughly as she was forced into it. I asked your daughter directly, through your own intermediary, whether she had reservations. You answered for her. I have those emails too. The screen changed again. The deepfake images creation metadata, dates and timestamps clearly visible, weeks before I had ever refused the marriage, proof the threat had been manufactured in advance, waiting, regardless of what my answer would have been. I heard my own audio recording play then, tinny through the church's speaker system, my mother's voice unmistakable. This is a way to be useful with the future you have left. The silence after that sentence was the loudest sound I had ever heard in my life. I don't know what kind of family does this to their own daughter, Richard said, quieter now, and when he finally turned to look at me, his expression had softened into something almost apologetic, though I understood even then that none of this was his fault to apologize for. But I know I won't be part of finishing what you started. The side doors opened before my mother could respond. 4 federal investigators, unremarkable in plain clothes, moved down the side aisle with the particular unhurried efficiency of people who had been waiting outside for exactly this cue. Richard, I would learn later, had spent the 2 days since my email not just gathering courage, but gathering a financial crimes attorney, a forensic document examiner, and a contact at the FBI's Financial Fraud Division who'd taken one look at the loan documents and the forged signatures, and moved considerably faster than anyone in that church had expected. Marcus tried to leave through a side exit and was stopped politely, firmly, by an investigator who already had his name. I watched my brother's face go through every stage of denial in about 4 seconds, watched him land, finally, on something like fear, real fear, maybe for the first time since he'd started this entire chain of consequences years earlier. My parents were arrested that afternoon, not dramatically, not in handcuffs paraded through the church for effect, but quietly, procedurally, in a side room where I didn't have to watch. Coercion, identity fraud, financial fraud tied to the marriage contract, extortion for the deepfake threat once investigators confirmed its manufactured timeline. My father separately for wire fraud connected to the introduction fee arrangement, and for his role in laundering portions of Marcus's debt through accounts that weren't entirely his to use. Marcus was charged separately, financial fraud, forgery on 2 of the loan applications that had used my name without my knowledge, and money laundering charges that, I learned later, went back further than even I had guessed, tangled up with the very associates whose threatening phone call I still remembered the sound of. The wedding, obviously, never happened. I stood at that altar in a dress my mother had chosen, in a church my mother had booked, watching my family get led out of a building through separate doors, and I felt, underneath the shock, something I hadn't expected to feel at all in that moment. Relief. Quiet, enormous relief. The kind that arrives after you've spent so long bracing for a blow that its absence feels almost like its own kind of pain. Richard found me afterward, once the church had mostly emptied, sitting alone in the front pew still in my wedding dress, staring at nothing in particular. "I'm sorry," he said, sitting a respectful distance away. "Not for what I did today, for what happened before I knew to do anything at all." "You didn't do this," I said. "You're the only person in this whole story who didn't." He was quiet for a moment. "You should finish law school," he said finally. "Not because I'm offering to fix anything for you, because I read your file last night, the real one, the one the university has on record. You earned that seat 4 years ago. Nobody gets to unearn something like that just because they had it stolen from them." I didn't answer him that day. I didn't have anything left in me to answer with. But 3 months later, once the criminal proceedings against my family had settled into their long, grinding legal rhythm, I got a call from the university's financial aid office informing me an anonymous donor had established a full scholarship fund in my name, covering tuition, housing, and a living stipend for the full 3 years of the program, structured deliberately so that it couldn't be traced back to any obligation, romantic or otherwise. I knew who it was. He never confirmed it directly, not once in all the years since. He didn't need to. I enrolled that fall. 28 years old, the oldest student in most of my classes, carrying 4 years of buried grief into a program I had once believed I'd failed to earn. I studied harder than anyone around me, not out of fear this time, but out of something closer to reclamation. Every exam, every late night in the library, a small act of taking back a version of myself that had been quietly erased before I ever got the chance to become her. My parents pleaded guilty eventually, to lesser charges than they were originally facing, part of an agreement that spared everyone a trial none of us wanted to live through publicly. Marcus received the longest sentence of the 3, once investigators finished untangling exactly how deep his financial schemes had gone, exactly how many people beyond our family he deceived along the way. I didn't attend the sentencing. I sent a written statement instead, read into the record by the prosecutor that said, in part, that the greatest harm done to me hadn't been the wedding or even the destroyed acceptance letter, but the years spent believing I wasn't capable of building a life without their permission. I graduated law school 4 years later, near the top of my class, with a specialization I'd chosen deliberately, carefully, in coercive control and financial exploitation within families. The exact intersection of harm I understood better than any professor could have taught me from a textbook. I passed the bar the following spring. My first case, 6 months into practicing, involved a 22-year-old client whose parents were quietly pressuring her toward a marriage she'd never agreed to, dressed up, the way mine had been in the language of family duty and sacrifice. I recognized every symptom before she'd finished describing them to me. 5 years after that wedding that never finished, I walked into a courtroom wearing a suit I'd bought with my own money, carrying a case file for a client who reminded me, in almost uncomfortable ways, of a 24-year-old version of myself sitting at a kitchen table with nowhere left to go. Richard was waiting outside the courtroom when I finished, the way he sometimes did on days he knew mattered to me, not as a husband, not as a savior, just as the person who had believed me before anyone else in my life had bothered to. "How'd it go?" he asked. "She's getting her life back," I said. He smiled, the quiet, unhurried smile of a man who'd learned, later in life than most, that the best thing you can do for someone is simply believe them the first time they tell you the truth. I walked out of that courthouse into an ordinary afternoon, sunlight on the sidewalk, my own name on a briefcase I'd earned twice over, and I understood, finally, completely, that the future my parents had tried so hard to sell was never really theirs to sell at all. It had always been mine. I was only just now